Hello, everyone. I'm also a new person here, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm a tech support professional, and as a tech support professional, I truly believe that tech writers are our comrades in arms in the ongoing struggle to help people harness technology. So it's in the spirit of that camaraderie that I'd like to enlist you in the project of rewriting the docs. Allow me to explain myself. Now none of those people are me, but growing up, I was always known as the technical one, the one people called to help them install software on their desktop, or navigate a website, or fix a broken phone. Being the technical one amongst my friends and my family got me into all sorts of situations, both fun and frustrating, but ultimately led to my career in the software industry. However, in addition to my role as head of customer success at Clubhouse Software, I'm also an activist and organizer, primarily in my community in Brooklyn, New York City. And though the groups that I work with are always really fantastic, they rarely tend to be techies. So in those cases, I'm once again called on to be the technical one. Over time, I met other people who were known as the technical ones in our circles of worker-owned cooperatives and activist groups and nonprofits. And together, a small group of us came to form a group called the Collective for Liberation, Ecology, and Technology. Those three, including me, were the core group that organized our activities. And as part of our work, we advise on technical infrastructure and help with social media, and overall just work with nonprofits and other sort of well-meaning groups to raise the overall digital literacy of the organization. As part of that work, we also end up doing a lot of documentation writing, what I call rewriting the docs. And by rewriting the docs, I don't mean that we go and write docs longhand or plagiarize the work, the fine work that all of you do. What we do is get into the organization's context and understand what they understand and write out documentation for them that speaks to their use case and their people and enables them to do the work they need to do and train their people on the software that they're using. Because unfortunately, in the case of a lot of these organizations, we're the only technical assistance they have. Most of the money that they have in their budgets, if they have any, goes to keeping their lights on, paying their staff, and providing emotional and financial support to the communities that they serve. So just looking at the images of the few groups that I've shown you that I've worked with in the past, I think gives you a sense that I've worked with a wide range of groups. And over that time, I was able to identify a few kind of common themes across all of them. So I pulled together sort of a brief guide for how best practices for working with groups like this. I call it the Guide to Providing Technical Help to Well-Meaning Groups with Little to No Money. And it's a three-step guide. The first thing that you need to do when you work with groups like this, you may have the best of intentions, and they're really, really great people doing amazing work. So you might end up working with them for decades, but to start, you want to have a very limited scope of work that you're doing with them. You want to understand what they need, what they can do, and sort of say how much time you can devote to it. You also need to be clear about what you need from them in order to make that work. If you need passwords from them or access to any of their people, making it really clear what you can do. In the case of this kind of work that's a large part emotional labor, a lot of them are working far beyond the scope of what they said they were initially going to do. So it's important to have a scope defined in writing that you can draw upon. So later on, when the scope starts to creep past what you agreed on, you can go back to the original agreement and say, I said I can only do 2 hours a week, something like that, and I'm only going to work on your Salesforce instance or whatever. The other thing is to learn their language. In most cases, these groups have reached out to you because their tech savvy doesn't extend very far past, let's say, Gmail or an odd Excel spreadsheet. So you want to understand and work with the people who are working with the systems that they've asked you to help with, and make sure that whatever you're doing is within scope for them. as the old saying goes, if you break it, you buy it. And a lot of the times, if you introduce new technology to groups before they can handle it, and with a very limited scope, as we talked about, your scope is going to expand a lot. And that new software, that new stack, that new system is going to be your baby. At a certain point, let's say if you work with this group for a long period of time, you may need to or want to change out systems, but working with them to optimize the systems they already have will put you in a better position to help them select software that will be most user-friendly to them. So the world is very full, I think as many of us know, with like well-meaning hack day projects that developers showed up on site to help nonprofits pull together. And the GitLab is full of repos with these like sort of half-finished projects. So whenever possible, just optimize rather than switching systems out. The third thing you want to do is document, document, document. Document what you touched, document what you tried, and also, most importantly, document how to use the systems that are set up now. You want to document with great specificity and great granularity, but try and keep the language really simple and user-friendly so that they can build on it later on, or if they find someone else like you who can provide them assistance, that person knows, okay, this is what they already tried. So I don't know how many people grew up or ended up reading the For Dummies books. This is sort of my first experience with technology. Growing up, I learned DOS and HTML and lots of other things sitting alongside my father, and I was always so excited when a new book would show up. They had these very funny sort of comics in there and guides about, okay, here's what you can handle, and here's a target sign that means this is the main points. Anyway, I really love these books, and they were just always so accessible. Now, these days, if you say For Dummies, it's sort of a slur or kind of means like dumbed down, but at that time, I felt like For Dummies kind of meant like for the people. This is our technology, and it's gonna, using this book, this is our field guide to hurtling into our new sort of fantastic techno future. I had very high hopes at that time. It didn't feel like there was a stratification or a digital divide. However, over time, some 20, 30 years later, I think we can find that though all of us have these devices in our pockets, the digital divide is in many ways wider than ever. And as a worker in the traditional software industry, I accept part of my responsibility for this. At Clubhouse, we are a company producing project management tools for software teams. We expect our user persona to be anything from a tech-savvy product manager who can sort of Google what they can't figure out to sort of a mad genius hacker, kind of builder of all things, who's usually writing in to tell us what features we're missing or how to refactor the entire system to make it work better for their use case. However, when I'm working with the nonprofits and the other sort of social justice groups, I can't assume this level of savviness. They're just not capable. And this is not to say that they're uneducated or uncurious. A lot of these people are accomplished lawyers, educators, community-based activists. These are the kind of people that will face down police and opposition groups and shout down politicians. However, at the same time, they also will positively melt into a puddle if you ask them about what phone they're using or the impact social media is having on the oftentimes vulnerable populations that they serve. So when working with these groups, I find that there's few other areas in our lives, in our daily lives, that so many people, at least in my world, routinely excuse themselves from discussing in any depth. So the work that I do and the documentation that I pull together is really focused on not just telling them how to use the software that they've got installed, but also how to overcome that feeling of frustration and that imposter syndrome that they bring to technology overall. This is all the more important when you're working with people who are really focused on changing the world in positive ways. Silicon Valley and the overall software industry is too economically, ecologically, politically, and socially significant to be left out of the equation when figuring out and devising an analysis of the world. So using, understanding, and re-envisioning technology is integral to a transformative vision for our planet. So getting into more specifics, I'm going to share a doc that I rewrote with you. This is and if you can't see it, don't worry, you don't have to squint. I'll just talk it through. This is a doc that I pulled together for a food cooperative. I'm a co-founder of a food cooperative in my neighborhood, and I was the head of the tech committee responsible for setting up the basic systems we needed just to get the thing off the ground. I pulled together this doc after different committee heads kept reaching out to me to ask how they could use the co-op domain email address. Google actually has documentation like this, of course, obviously, but the people that I was working with did not know what an email client was, so they wouldn't have known even what to Google to find what they needed. So I pulled this doc together, and it walked through pretty much every step that I think they would need to get into this email. And of course, the docs are in Google Docs, because again, that was what people were comfortable with. When we first sort of had the inception of the food co-op, I really was like, okay, this is gonna be my dream project, and we can use all open source. But as we got in a little bit deeper, I realized this was more than I could handle, and I have a day job and a family. So I just kept it in the systems that they were familiar with. And drink some water. So on to how I actually rewrite the docs, or how we rewrite the docs. And this pretty much maps onto that 3-step guide to helping groups with little to no money. The first thing is to meet the groups where they are. Again, as I mentioned, the tech savvy is usually not there, so understanding kind of what they need, defining a scope for that work is pretty crucial at the beginning. Working with the software that they have and trying to optimize flows and pull together documentation that they can use to train their people. The second thing is to get into the context. In this example that I showed you about the food cooperative, I knew that the first people that needed it were committee heads. So I mentioned it, it's like, okay, you're a committee head, what will you need to make this work for you? In this case, this is Hopewell Care Cooperative. They're a worker-owned cooperative of child and elder care workers. And we knew that the systems that we set up were going to be used by the care workers in some cases, and other systems were going to be used by the administrators that are also part of their group. So when we pulled together a training for them and also documentation, we made it clear, like, okay, this is the part the care workers do, this is the part the admins do. Whenever possible, it's very important to get into the context and name people by names, even if it helps. And the third part, after you do the work for them, is to really just document everything that you did and hand the documents over to them so they can test it out. Go away. I think somebody mentioned this, kind of like, don't talk a lot when you're doing user research. I think you can apply some of those skills here. Go away, let them try it, and get back to you about what was confusing. And I add a bonus sort of 3A, which is share the official documentation. As I mentioned, for a lot of the groups that I work with, their Google hands are not super strong, so the more you can point them to where they need to go, the better, so that they can try and do a little troubleshooting themselves before they reach out to you for more free technical help. So in the beginning, I said I'd like to enlist tech writers' help in the work of rewriting the docs. So I'm going to go over a few ways that you can enlist. Again, it's three steps. Ooh, back. So the first step is to get into the product. A lot of the folks that I work with are not going to find documentation really easily. You know, they're used to paper manuals. So whenever possible, if you can have the link to the documentation in the UI of the product, that's very helpful for these groups in terms of searchability and trying to solve some of their own problems. The second thing to do is try and keep your docs up to date and image rich. I oversee the documentation function at my day job. I know how documentation backlogs can pile up, especially in a continuous deployment environment. But as much as possible, try and power through those backlogs, especially when something significant in the UI changes. For the groups that I work with, if a UI changes completely, that might be their whole day gone. So as much as possible, try and be mindful of that. The third thing is to accept feedback. Whenever you can, if the groups that I work with do get into that official documentation and there's anything confusing, I'd like to be able to empower them to reach out to you directly as technical writers and say, this doesn't make sense, or this looks kind of wrong to me. I recently came across this page on the Civi CRM docs, and this is not a knock to Civi CRM. We use this quite a lot. We like Civi. But I saw this green pencil up here in the corner, and I thought it was pretty cool. I was like, oh, I'm going to click this, and it's going to be some kind of WYSIWYG setup where I can change the documentation on the fly. Unfortunately, when I clicked it, it led me to a page that just sort of a showstopper for the people that I work with. Nobody's forking anything. So whenever possible, if you can add an email or some sort of inbox that people can connect to you about the documentation, that's really helpful. And more than just sending you feedback, please try and make sure there's someone, if you can, someone actually on the other end of that will write back and say, thanks for this feedback, or these are the things we can do, and maybe funnel you along to some sort of support. So in closing, to rewrite the docs, you want to sort of learn their language, learn where they are, get into their context, know which kind of people are going to be using it, and make sure you mention them in the documentation so they know this is documentation for me, here's where I come in. And finally, document and test. Make sure your documentation makes sense for them. And to enlist and be good comrades to us in the radical IT department, get the documentations into the product whenever you can, link to the documentation. Keep your documentation up to date and image rich, and accept feedback in a way that people who aren't super tech savvy can supply it to you. In the work that I do, both in my day job at Clubhouse as head of support, overseeing documentation support, customer success, and also in my community, my highest goal is to let people come to technology, help people come to technology empowered. When I rewrite the docs, I do so to write in that this doesn't have to be difficult, that this technology can be fun, and most importantly, that the technology is ours. So that's it. Solidarity with everyone here. That's my email. That's my social. If you're on Mastodon, you can tweet at me. And I have links to the organizations that I mentioned on my website, and I'll be adding my slide deck and more information about what I wrote there. Solidarity.